Welcome to the Daphne Best Practice and Service Improvement Training. It is the responsibility of each Daphne educator or doctor to maintain their Daphne skills as evidenced by Daphne Best Practice, revalidation and external audit requirements. This training outlines the Daphne Best Practice process undertaken by Daphne educators. The participant experience is central to the self-management philosophy of Daphne. By following the Daphne Best Practice guidance, educators can reflect on and develop their educator skills, ensuring course participants have a consistent experience of a Daphne course, whichever course format they choose to attend and wherever they access a Daphne course. The objectives of this learning are outlined here. The main aims of this training are to clarify the best practice process, so as an educator you know what to do, how to do it and when, including how to complete the 2 best practice documents. As part of the training, you will need to familiarise yourself with the documents listed here and available in the Daphne Central Resources area of the Open Learn Create web platform. The session observation and professional development plan forms are used in the best practice process. The document Maintaining Daphne Status and Return to Practice Guidance for Educators and Doctors outlines what to do to maintain your active Daphne status, what to do if you leave or join a centre, and how to regain active Daphne status after a career break. The document What Constitutes Face-to-Face Course Delivery is helpful with regard to the number of sessions you need to deliver if you are planning to deliver a face-to-face Daphne course. Quality assurance is a key element of Daphne, aligned to the Department of Health criteria for structured education programmes. Criteria require evidence to demonstrate ongoing review and competency development as part of the educator and doctor role. For doctors, key skills are evidenced through completing Daphne revalidation every 104 weeks only. Educators also complete Daphne revalidation every 104 weeks and in addition engage in the best practice process to review and develop their educator skills. As part of the best practice process, we encourage Daphne educators to deliver 4 courses in any course format they are trained in every 104-week revalidation period. Educators who are not employed full-time can share course delivery by following the guidance on what constitutes course delivery in the 2 documents mentioned previously. This also allows for cover for unpredicted absence and planned leave. Familiarise yourself with this guidance. Of the 4 courses delivered in the revalidation period, 2 courses should be allocated for observation of the individual dose adjustment and action plans session or part of the course. The observer and educator observed should complete the session observation form, engage in reflective discussion, identify areas for development, and set development objectives with the aim of achieving objectives within the revalidation period. We recommend that all educators are involved in the best practice process as part of their professional development and evidence of reflective practice. Observation, feedback and reflection encourages the sharing of ideas for improving course delivery and the experience of course participants, contributing to service improvement. During course delivery, it can be challenging to facilitate, keep track of participant progress against the learning outcomes, your use of facilitation skills, and noting what is working well and not so well for your group. Having an observer present, noting these things for you and feeding back, supports reflective practice and skills development. The observation is a snapshot of key skills to help you practice reflectively as an educator. For this reason, it is not necessary to observe more than the individual dose adjustment and action plans session of a face-to-face course format, or the corresponding part of facilitation of group video support calls as part of a remote course format. The individual dose adjustment and action plans part of the course, or group diary discussions, focus on supporting self-management decision-making and behaviour change, requiring group facilitation skills to cover many Daphne principles, an ideal opportunity for reflective practice. As mentioned previously, we encourage all Daphne educators to be involved in reflective practice, so an observer can be any active educator who has completed this training. As part of planning your Daphne courses, plan for observation during 2 courses in your revalidation period. If you are team teaching or co-facilitating, you can observe and feed back to each other. Alternatively, you may find observation by another team member you work with less frequently more beneficial when sharing best practice ideas. Course observation is a collaborative process. The observer's role is to gather evidence through observation and active listening, and record the evidence in sections 1 to 5 of the session observation form, to feed back observed evidence in a constructive way and engage in reflective discussion to enable the educator to reflect on their practice and identify their own development objectives. The role is that of critical friend. The observer role is not to give an opinion on an educator's practice and identify development objectives for them. The role of the educator is to facilitate the session appropriately, listen to constructive feedback, engage in reflective discussion, make their own notes in the session observation form sections 6 to 8, and identify development objectives. You will be aware from course delivery and facilitation that the individual dose adjustment and action plans session or part of a course repeats throughout the course on a daily or weekly basis. The number of these part sessions to be observed depends on the course format. During formats delivered over 5 weeks, a minimum of 2 part sessions between weeks 2 to 5 should be observed. During formats delivered over 1 week, a minimum of 3 part sessions should be observed between day 1 and day 5, AM or PM. As an educator, you may choose to have more than this minimum number of part sessions observed to aid your reflective practice. To recap, you will need 1 session observation form for each course that is observed, and 1 professional development plan to record your development objectives from your 2 course observations. Forms can be downloaded as required from the Maintaining Daphne Status and Return to Practice tab of the Daphne Central Resources area. Let's look at how to complete the session observation form. The form is divided into 8 sections. Sections 1 to 5 are completed by the observer during observation. Sections 6 to 8 are completed by the educator being observed during reflective feedback and discussion with the observer. To keep track of your observations, complete the table on page 1 with your name and centre, date of observation, and the name of your observer. Identify which of the part sessions have been observed. This may be the minimum number required or more than the minimum number. Section 2 lists the essential content to be covered in the session. Essential content links to a learning outcome for the session. For participants to be able to achieve the learning outcome, all essential content must be covered in the session. If observation is for the minimum number of part sessions, some learning outcomes may not be fully achieved in the sessions observed. If this is the case, have a plan for where the content will be discussed again to achieve the learning outcome. Observation of individual dose adjustment and action planning sessions later in the course will allow for discussion of more Daphne principles. Consider arranging your observation sessions later in the course if you can only be observed for the minimum number of sessions. The essential content covers the basics of insulin dose adjustment and action planning. Tick the box when essential content is covered. Learning Outcome 5 relates to goal setting, which is covered in a separate session in face-to-face Pump Daphne, so it is not essential to cover this content in this session of face-to-face Pump Daphne. Make a note in section 6 that this will be covered in the goal setting and action planning session in face-to-face Pump Daphne if this is the case. The essential content is listed at the end of the lesson plan in the curriculum for face-to-face course formats and in the body of the lesson plan in the educator manual for remotely delivered course formats. Expected content is listed in section 3. Expected content does not link directly to learning outcomes but should be covered in the session. The process for recording expected content in the session observation form is the same as that for essential content. Section 4 allows the observer to record evidence of how the educator facilitates the session, including educator actions, educator attitude and response to the group, and that content is honest, accurate and up to date. To complete this section, begin in the first left-hand column highlighted in the table. Place a tick in the relevant box every time you observe a behaviour. The more often you see a behaviour, the more ticks there will be, progressing from left to right. The chart will highlight an educator's preferences and strengths. It also helps to identify seldom used behaviours, which educators may wish to develop and include in their development objectives in Section 8. But what do these actions actually mean, and how do you identify them? The next few slides will explore examples of these, but the examples are not an exhaustive list. If you'd like to think about examples, view the following slides. If not, skip to Section 5. Section 5 records educator strategies and resources used. Follow the same process for completing the table as for Section 4. This is the last section of the session observation form completed by the observer. Evidence recorded in Sections 1 to 5 is used as the basis for feedback on the observation in discussion with the educator. Before moving on to the sections completed by the educator, it can be helpful to think about feedback in more detail. Feedback as part of Daphne Best Practice is a professional dialogue between the observer and the educator and relates to the evidence recorded, what was seen and heard. The purpose of feedback is to support educators to identify strengths and weaknesses in order to develop as a Daphne educator. Feedback is objective, positive and constructive, based on what has been observed. Avoid subjective comparisons with others. Feedback is most productive when there is uninterrupted time and space for a conversation to take place, and both parties are able to review the evidence recorded. Arrange feedback after all part sessions identified for observation have been observed. Here are some good practice guidelines for giving feedback. Remember, the best practice process is not an assessment, but is a development tool. It is possible that while completing the session observation form as an observer, you may miss something, for example, a point of essential content. If you are not sure, ask the educator to tell you how and when they covered the content. This might jog your memory. Content may have been missed because the group were more focused on a different aspect of Daphne, or the educator may have decided to park the content for discussion at another time, or simply forgotten to discuss it. If content was not covered, it is a simple matter of agreeing an appropriate place in the course to revisit and include discussion of the content. Making sure all content is covered supports participants to achieve the learning outcomes. The educator can reflect and develop a plan based on the results of the feedback discussion. The educator being observed completes the session observation form from Section 6 onwards as part of the feedback discussion. Agreed essential content that was not delivered should be recorded under essential content missed or parked. A plan to include the content before the end of the course should be recorded under sessions where missed or parked essential content will be included. This may be an individual dose adjustment and action plans session later in the course, or a different session being delivered by the educator. For example, the following week's group video support call, or another curriculum session on a face-to-face course that will be delivered by the educator. In Section 6, Part 2, the educator should note evidence of how essential content was delivered to achieve each of the learning outcomes of the session, as illustrated here. Section 7 provides an opportunity for the educator to reflect on delivery and note what went well and what didn't go so well with the help of the observer, including how previous objectives have been actioned and how any changes made have worked. The final section of the session observation form is Section 8, the Professional Development Plan. An educator can note any new development objectives identified as a result of reflective discussion in this section. It is not essential to have an objective for each of the 2 observations in the revalidation period. Using a SMART approach can help you to set achievable objectives. Record if new objectives have been set and update the PDP. Some people find using the to, by, which process helpful. The to, by, which process is outlined here. Section 8 of the Session Observation Form allows for recording of objectives set as a result of reflection on practice as part of observation. To ensure objectives are not lost, transfer objectives to the overall PDP form. Each educator can download the overall PDP form from the Daphne Central Resources area, Maintaining Daphne Status and Return to Practice tab. You will need one form for each 104-week revalidation period. In Section 1, record the start and end dates of your revalidation period, either from your RDEP certificate or from your last revalidation certificate. In Section 2, transfer any objectives set during observation as part of best practice and recorded in Section 8 of the Session Observation Form. You may set other development objectives for the revalidation period. Think about how they'll be measured and expected to be completed. As an experienced educator, your development objectives may be related to other things other than course delivery, such as development of the Daphne service in your centre, development of new educators, doctors or team members, promoting Daphne to healthcare professionals who may refer to your Daphne service, promoting Daphne to people living with type 1 diabetes, or providing Daphne awareness training for colleagues, or developing support and follow-up for Daphne graduates. Ensure objectives are SMART. If you are completing best practice and service improvement as part of educator training, for example, RDEP or Remote Daphne to Face-to-Face Daphne Conversion Training, make sure you access other information required and complete all steps before submitting your declaration when instructed.